Hello, everybody. Welcome to our wonderful event here at the Chester Hotel. You're more than welcome to, of course, have your coffee, your breakfast. We have a fabulous range of speakers, a panel, and lots of discussion, which we'll be opening out to the audience at some point. I've been told that if there is a fire alarm, it's time to run screaming for the exits. Actually, no, sorry, don't run screaming, but there will be ways to get us out to a safe place because they'll need to, but there's nothing like that planned. And of course, just a little bit of timings here. So we're going to have some wonderful speakers, including Stephen Flynn, the MP for Aberdeen South, who will then be followed by Andrew Hawkey, who's the Chief Executive of the ECITB. Then we will have a great panel discussion, which also includes Paul Deleu from the Energy Transition Institute at RGU, Martin Simonet from Wood, and Emma Bejat, who's the co-chair of the Access Network, among other things that she's doing to ensure that diversity stays at the top, and then, of course, a Q&A. If you have any questions, we'll all address them there, but if you need to ask a question, just feel free to shout. My name's Erica Askelet. I'm recently rejoined Energy Voice, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here. But first, I think the most important thing is to introduce Stephen Flynn, who will come and speak with us. Of course, he's had a very interesting week. And hopefully he'll be able to tell us a little bit more about what's going on. I'm sure I would assume that there's many people in this room who aren't going to mourn the loss of the Butte House Agreement. I could be wrong on that one, but I'm hoping that this means that there's a great deal more clarity on the energy industry. But no pressure, Stephen, no pressure. Please come to the stage. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Is this mic working okay? Yes, good. That's moderately reassuring. I'm not going to stand behind the podium because I'm not used to doing that. Folks, it's fantastic to be here this morning, and as Erica has said, I'm absolutely delighted that it's this week and not last week that I was coming here. But, in life, things can always be a little bit worse, and that was reminded to me yesterday when I shared a lift in Westminster with Liz Truss. But things can also be much better, and just as a day is a long time in politics, so is a week. And in a week, I believe that my party and indeed the Scottish Government is in a much better place. We have a First Minister who I'm sure you're all very familiar with, someone who is no stranger to the business community, someone who was in control of Scotland's finances for a considerable period of time, and someone who provides an assurance, seniority, a serious person for very, very serious times indeed, and someone who is set out initially, as he did yesterday, by appointing his cabinet and making sure that it's a cabinet which is representative of all the different aspects of my own party, but hopefully all the different aspects of Scottish society as well. And I was particularly delighted to see Kate Forbes take on the role as Deputy First Minister. Again, a very strong signal from government that is here to engage with the business community, with the investment community on Scotland's economy to ensure that we can get the jobs that we so badly need in Scotland for the future to come. But there was, of course, another position which was confirmed, and that was Mary McCallan as the Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero. And Net Zero cannot be understated in terms of its importance. Now, I woke up this morning about 15 minutes ago. Thankfully, I live very close, so I was able to get here in no time at all. And just as I was mustering from my own bed, so were my 2-year-old and my 4-year-old. And I think, what will the world be like when they're my age? What will Aberdeen be like when they're my age? In that respect, net zero isn't a choice, it's an imperative. It's an imperative to ensure that we have a planet which is habitable and enjoyable for all. But it's also imperative if we are to ensure that we have jobs and opportunities in this city in 20, 30, 40, and 50 years' time. And that means it's an opportunity that we cannot afford to miss. And when we look at that landscape, there are many things that we can all do to make sure that we hit net zero and we go on that journey together. Some of that falls on the responsibility, it falls on the shoulders of government. It requires certainty from government in terms of what government is seeking to want to do, where its policy objectives are and how it intends to get there. Collaboration, not just between industry itself, which we know Aberdeen is famed for, but between government and industry to provide that certainty on the journey to net zero. We also need to make sure that more practical things are in place, that there are funding mechanisms which provide the incentives for projects to get off the ground and to deliver for the next 30 or 40 years. We need to make sure that the grid is up to capacity, that where projects can come online, there is a connection and there's certainty over that connection. We need to make sure that we're investing in not just the supply chain, but in the skills and expertise of the people who work within that supply chain to hit net zero too. So there's many aspects where government can and must play a leading role, but that leading role cannot be done in isolation. It has to be done in partnership with industry itself. It's only by doing that that we'll be able to hit net zero. And that excites me. It excites me massively, and it should excite you too, not just in terms of the business opportunities that are available, but in terms of the transformative change that we can make to society, not just for our generation, but for the generation to come, my Wayans and your Wayans, and their Wayans after that as well. And in an Aberdeen context, what a chance we have. How many other cities in the world have the opportunity of oil and gas and then have the opportunity of net zero? Not too far from here, up in the northeast coast, we have the potential for carbon capture and storage. Some certainty would be helpful. Just off the coast of Aberdeen, within 100 miles of Aberdeen, sits 70% of Scotland, 28 gigawatts of offshore wind, and of course we have INTOG as well, the decarbonisation of our oil and gas assets. And I'm sure all of you were as delighted as I was to see Greenvolt get over the line with the Scottish Government just a few weeks ago, a signal of intent. But then we look further into Scotland, and we look at hydro pump storage and the opportunities which exist at Corrie Glass and at Cruachan. We look at the potential to harness all this electricity, this abundance of electricity, renewable electricity that we have to create green hydrogen. And I cannot tell you the extent of the conversations I have in London and ambassadorial offices right across Belgravia from some of the most important people on the planet who want to hear about Aberdeen and Scotland's journey over the coming years. How we can use our resources to benefit them and benefit ourselves too. And this is why I'm excited. Because not only does Aberdeen have that oil and gas past, that oil and gas future, but it has the renewables future to hit net zero too. And that means that whilst many cities struggle, and Aberdeen itself has struggled over recent years, we can rebuild, and we can rebuild better than ever, with a sustainable future where people have good, high quality, well-paid, well-meaning jobs. But with all opportunities in life, you've got to grasp it. And we need to stop talking about these things. It was 4 years ago, last time I was in here, I think it was, giving a commentary in relation to the renewables industry. We can't just keep talking about it. We can't just keep talking about it. We have to grasp the opportunity, not let it slip through our fingers, because if we do, then others across the world will take up the mantle. So let's look to the future. Let's work together. Let's make sure that Aberdeen has the future it deserves, our young people have the future that they deserve, and our economy benefits on both those fronts. I have no idea if that's 7 minutes or not, Erica. I hope it is. But thank you very much, and I look forward to the panel. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Stephen. And I think I speak for a lot of people, particularly at Energy Voice and eForward, that we're actually really excited too about the energy transition and the possibilities and the opportunities. There's going to be some rough things along the way, but I think the way it's coming together is fascinating. And I think part of that area that we need to kind of focus on would be actually including Stephen's gorgeous children and their future. And what are we going to be doing to ensure that the people who are currently working in the energy industry are able to continue working in the energy industry, whatever form that takes? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Andrew Hockey, who's the Chief Executive of the Engineering Construction Industry Training Board. Now, he's responsible for, no pressure, but he's responsible for ensuring those skills are delivered and that the industry delivers those skills. ECITB is a levy-funded body, and they were initially set up in order to deliver what was a skills gap. And you're doing that very well. So without further ado, please come and tell us what you have to say.
Thank you, Erica. Is the microphone working at the back? Yeah, very good. So good morning, everyone. My name's Andrew Hockey. I'm very, very pleased to be here in Aberdeen this morning. It's a place I've been coming to throughout my career for what will be 40 years this November, when I started as a very fresh-faced well site geologist off on the Tiffany appraisal well with Phillips back all those years ago. So really great. Thank you for the opportunity to come and speak. This city has been absolutely critical for Europe's energy industry for many, many decades, and it's going to be critical for many decades to come, hopefully. And I think I just want to pick up on Stephen's point there, which he made so well, without notes, unlike me, which he made so well, that there's an real opportunity here to be seized. So how can we at the ECITB help? Because that's what we're here to do. We're here to help. We're a statutory skills body for the engineering construction industry. That's a specialised industry that underpins the delivery, the maintenance and the decommissioning of much of the UK's critical infrastructure. And that includes oil and gas and nuclear and renewables. So I want to begin just by acknowledging again how important this region is, not just to those industries based here and everyone in this room, but to the whole of the UK. And we're a UK-wide body, or England, Wales and Scotland-wide body, and we work very closely with the Scottish Government and have very good relationships with them. But today Aberdeen also faces some very specific challenges. We've had commodity price volatility. We need to develop our infrastructure. We need to diversify the economy to ensure we have a resilient workforce and that we can retain a skilled, resilient workforce. Aberdeen is recognised across the globe, really, for its prominence in oil and gas, and with support from industry and government and investors and the community, we can continue to hold the title here as Europe's energy capital in perpetuity. Now, I started my tenure last year. I've been with the ECITB a year now, and I started by travelling across the country to meet employers, training providers, the people that make it happen, the people that help us upskill the workforce, government representatives, the unions, and operators of key industrial sites. And everywhere I heard the same message, very consistent. The demand for skilled workers is greater than it's ever been, and it's only going to go in one direction. That's up. We need the people, we need their skills, and we need them in unprecedented numbers. And that presents us with a challenge and with an opportunity. And to capitalise on that, then we need to innovate. The development of a sustainable workforce really goes hand in hand with developing people's skills. We need investment, development, and then we need to deliver. In our last strategy period, between up until 2023, the ECITB reinvested £84 million of industrial levy back into industry to support that training and support that development. We recognise the increase in demand through our 2023 to 2025 strategy, and now we've committed over £87 million to further support that workforce training and to tackle industry's labour shortages and the skills gap over that time period. We have a labour forecasting tool, which is quite a sophisticated model. It's free. You can look at it on our website, and I recommend you have a look at that. But that tool predicts that there's a gap for new workers across the ECI, the engineering construction industry, of 40,000 people across the UK, and we expect to see a 32% increase in Scotland alone in requirement for skilled labour over the next 3 years. So there's a real issue there for us to face. We also want, across the course of our 3-year strategy, to continue to support industry, and this is one of the key planks of our strategy as we navigate the path to net zero. It's really, really key that we help industry to do that. So we recognise the need to work closely with ultimate clients, with contractors, and with those providers of training across the 6 major industrial clusters up and down the UK. And to do that, we actually have a number of specific interventions that we're making. Earlier this year, we announced a £1 million investment fund for regional skills hubs, specifically designed to boost training provider capacity and to help in those industrial cluster hotspots. The Scottish industrial cluster is hugely important for us at the ECITB. A large chunk, nearly 40% of our annual levy, comes from Scotland, from oil and gas, from nuclear, from renewables. So it's very, very important. It's not just a geographical concentration of industries, it's a community where multiple companies and their employees actively collaborate, create enormous value for the region through their joint expertise and innovation. For us here at ECITB, it's about finding new and creative solutions to cultivating a skilled workforce that retains existing talent but encourages the next generation, above all, to come in and seek out those rewarding career opportunities that are on offer across the industries that we look at. So picking up again on Stephen's theme, what are we doing about it? We're just talking, or we're doing something about it? There's a number of things we're doing. Here in Aberdeen, you may have heard of one of our initiatives, Connected Competence. It's an ECITB-enabled, industry-led initiative, and it has its spiritual home right here. It's simple. What it does is it allows a safe, competent, and transferable workforce. It's been a challenge that we've faced in the industry since we first embarked on extracting natural resources from our offshore waters way back in the 1960s. You may not be familiar with exactly how it works, but essentially the journey starts with a worker taking an optional one-off knowledge test, either online or at a physical centre. We base those tests on practical, common activities within the trades. Once you've done the test, you're connected, competent, certified for 3 or 4 years, depends on your specialist trade. So we're embedding that to help create a transferable and resilient workforce. And again, it has its own website. It's well worth going and having a look, seeing how that's working. Been very successful in the last year or two. We now have 20 offshore operators signed up to the charter for Connected Competence, and so willing to support it to the hilt and make sure it happens. So as that continues to embed across industry, it provides us with something we've long sought. That's a harmonised approach to competence, a harmonised approach to skills transition across industry, and that allows workers to deploy more quickly to new assets, to new roles, to organisations, and hopefully in time across sectors. So we're working very hard now that we've established Connected Competence in oil and gas to move it on across into the renewables and energy sector and on the whole. So it's vital then that we use this type of initiative to make sure that the accumulated knowledge and skills that we have here in Aberdeen are protected and nurtured, and that we support the existing workforce and we attract new investment as well. Enabling the transferability of existing workers is important, but it's also important that we think about how we innovate when we attract new people into the industry, new entrants into the industry. So a few more examples again to pick up on Stephen's point of, are we talking about it or doing something about it? We hope we're doing something about it. At Nesco, we've just started to work together to develop a wind turbine technician course pathway. That's a 2-year wind turbine technician scholarship. That's creating a pipeline of young talent for us with the knowledge and the technical skills required for both onshore and offshore roles. Across the UK, including in Scotland, our ECITB scholarship programme was introduced originally as a result of COVID. And it's seen very, very encouraging growth since we began, with hundreds of scholars from previous cohorts having now transitioned into full-time work with engineering construction industry companies. And what the programme does, it aims to accelerate learners into apprenticeships or other forms of employment by giving them the basic training they need for some of the necessary components of an apprenticeship off the job in an approved centre. So it gets them to the level where they can make a choice and come into the industry, and they can see what the wonderful opportunities are that are on offer for them. We recognise also that pathways are not always open to everyone. So another new entrant pathway expansion that we've been working very hard on is our Work Ready programme. That's a collaborative and co-funded partnership, and that's normally between college, local employers, ourselves, and the Department of Work and Pensions. And that helps to bring in people who wouldn't normally get access to the industry, the long-term unemployed, for example. And Erica's waving at me, so I'll wrap up. But it's that's also, we're having a great deal of success with that. Just this year, we've put 50 people into permanent positions through that scheme. So we have an ambition at the ECITB for Scotland, for the North East, to help deliver net zero and energy security. It's a huge challenge. To succeed, it does need collaboration. I've mentioned a number of organisations here, and I think you've understood the breadth that we're working with to make that happen. So we're going to protect, nurture and support the skills and knowledge of the workforce here in Aberdeen, and I'll give you my commitment that the ECITB will be playing its part in doing that. So thank you, and I hope I haven't overrun beyond 9 minutes.
Thank you. And of course, some of you will be involved in the workshop led by Andrew and my colleague Ryan Duff as well. So don't miss that. And you'll be able to find out a lot more about the work that ECITB is doing, particularly in the Northeast. So thank you so much. So at this point, I think is when we're changing the stage around a little bit. Excellent. Thank you. And then, of course, now is when I start to welcome my fabulous panel of speakers. What we'll do, though, is we're going to have you in a certain order. So we'll start with Stephen, please, Andrew, Paul in the middle. That's nothing about, kind of like what we're hoping that you'll say. We'll also welcome Martin Simonite, as well as Emma Bajat, please. Thank you. Thank you. So this is where the excitement really starts. Thank you all very much for coming. What I'll do is I'm going to suggest that you introduce yourselves, but I'm going to throw you a softball, to maybe address when it comes to some of the discussions that we're hoping to have. And then by the time that they're finished kind of talking about their discussions, your hands will be shooting up, desperate to ask them questions when we come to the Q&A sessions. So all good. So we've spoken already to Stephen and Andrew. Paul, now you're the director of the Energy Transition Institute at RGU. And of course, you do a really fascinating series of on research about employment and skills in the industry, and what happens to the employment in UK and Scotland and the Northeast, depending on how much we're investing in new technologies and manufacturing and all that sort of stuff. So now I know that you're about to release the latest. And I don't know what you can say, but what can you say about the latest update that you've got on your research?
That's all right, that's all right. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the fantastic setup this morning. Yeah, we will be releasing a latest report in 2 weeks' time. It's about just and fair transitions, and I'm not going to give you the ins and outs of what is in there. You can read it in a couple of weeks yourself. But the one thing I do want to say, which is following up from the previous speakers, this is a future we can create, and it's all about what future do we want. Now, and this is really kind of important, because actually there's a huge amount of money to be spent. And if you follow the money, it will tell you where we're going to be. So up to 200 billion to be spent over the remainder of this decade in the offshore energy industry. Huge amount of money. But only roughly half of that is currently approved. So you think about it, 100 billion, around 100 billion is still to play for. And depends how much of that we're going to spend the remainder of this decade and just shortly after that is going to determine how much activity we do and how many people we need. And this is where the big question comes in, because we do need absolutely government, regulators, policymakers, industry to work together, because if we don't approve it, we won't simply get the jobs. And that is the big worry we have, because of course, if you look where the jobs currently are, there's a massive cluster. Half the jobs in the offshore energy industry are in Scotland. And then, of course, a huge amount here in the northeast of Scotland. So if we don't get this right, we have a big impact on what is happening on future employment. So what we're arguing for is the price is there. The UK is extraordinarily well positioned. Scotland is in an ideal position, as you heard from the previous speakers. Let's grab this, but it will require a complete alignment between government, regulators and industry to do so. And I have to say, we need a little bit more work, Stephen. To do that.
He's looking at you, Stephen.
Yeah, not just you, but your colleagues as well, of course, all parties here. And that is, I think, is absolutely critical. You will hear more about it in our report in 2 weeks' time. So thank you for.
Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Great. So, Martin, thank you for coming. Wood Group is a fascinating industrial body. You work all over the world. You're working, we know you as the chandler that turned into a global oil and gas services behemoth, but now you're working in all the energy areas. But one of the things that actually Andrew's workforce labor tool has highlighted is young people, actually, they're not that interested in oil and gas. It's dirty. All their friends are gluing themselves to pavements instead. They don't see there's a great deal of, but that's still where the people are coming from. What challenges are you seeing there in terms of recruitment for young people, next generation, that sort of thing? Or is it a problem at all?
Or is it a problem at all? So firstly, thank you, and yeah, great to be here and a great event, hopefully. What challenges do we see? I think we are suffering with negative rhetoric. So, you know, we have a continual theme of negativity around the oil and gas industry, whether that be from Parliament, whether that be from lobbying competitors in terms of Parliament, whether that be through universities and education institutions as well. My children at university, they are doing sustainability and conservation, and they have a constant theme that is against the oil and gas industry. And it's very difficult. They're very proud of what I do, fortunately. But you know, if you look at the spread of people that are hearing that rhetoric, it's very difficult. I think what we've seen over the last year or so is a drop in applicants from the graduate fraternity coming into the industry. This year we are hoping to increase our intake up to 200 people. And that's both graduate and apprentices, trade and craft and technical. Which is a huge investment in new skills. It's a huge investment into the future. But we're also doing a lot of work with local schools. We're trying to encourage STEM. We're trying to look at how we can improve the thinking around engineering and construction. It's not just oil and gas. There's a huge future ahead of us. We're looking at how we pivot the business, so looking at how we decarbonise, how we electrify, but also how we look at transitioning wood to make sure we're ready for whether it's transition into plastics to energy, whether it's the circular economy, pharmaceuticals, or the hydrogen markets. And we are gaining more traction in those markets. We know that from bringing talent into the industry, that's a real take in terms of attraction. But we've got to balance that side of the attraction with what we need today, which is energy security. And energy security needs a responsibility around decarbonisation. So we're working it on all different fronts.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because there's so many people in this audience who are oil and gas is doing very well right now, just in case you didn't know. But everyone has also got fingers in all these pies, you know, in terms of what the future of the energy transition is. And I think, you know, wood is a great exemplar of that. So, and then, last but not least, Emma, thank you ever so much for joining us. You're working with Access, and Access is a voluntary network, but with a big, carries a big fist. They do a lot and influence a lot. I love all the work that you've been doing about PPE that fits women. guess what? Women aren't just little men. They need kind of PPE that actually, is designed to fit, kind of like our bodies. They also are talking about, and my colleague Ryan has done a lot of work on this. You know what? Actually, we need, kind of sanitary products offshore. Guess what? People need to be told this. Now, there's other stuff that Axis is doing, but I just wanted to say, yesterday I was sat around a table with the VP of drilling and the VP of subsea, and we're all women, and it felt like it was madness. But it's the sort of thing we need to see more. So please, tell me, what sort of things are you seeing in the industry now in terms of diversity?
Okay, thank you, and thanks everybody for being here, and it's great to have Axis representation. I guess we all know that the energy industry is male-dominated. I think if we look at the workforce, women make up 40% of the workforce, but in the energy sector, we only make up 16%. So compared to other sectors, we are falling behind. The UN have a policy that they want to have gender equity by 2030, and the energy industry is well behind on achieving that. So I think we obviously know that the gender pay gap report came out recently, and Axis did do our own gender pay gap analysis, so you can find that on our website. And in that, we found some interesting intel. So actually, energy companies, like if we look at the energy sector and we split it out to service companies and energy companies, our energy companies are leading the way, although behind every other sector, they're still leading the way. And they've had a 10% reduction in that pay gap. But then if we look at the service companies, they've only had a 1.3% change in that pay gap. And we need to look at the reasons why that's happening. And I know that we heard earlier about ECTB, and I think this, I forgot, and about how we're trying to recruit more people into the energy industry and obviously looking at that energy transition. And when we do that, we need to think about the systematic change. We do not want old policies and principles that for some reason are limiting women coming into the industry, going on into the energy transition as well. And we're an advocate for, we don't need to fix the woman, like you say, we're not we're not trying to fix the woman. We don't just need to have things like training programs specified for women or anything like that. We need to see what's wrong with the system, and we're advocating for systematic change. And that's what we try and do. So we have a number of pledge accounts, and all the pledge accounts are, are oil and gas majors and also service companies. And we found that those pledge accounts who commit to us a commitment to gender equity, that those are making greater headway in terms of their gender pay gap, which obviously is one tool we can use to see if there's a gender balance within that company. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, lots to do, and we have lots of exciting. I know I could go on forever, but I don't know how long we're talking. I know we want to open the floor, so I'll just wrap it up there.
Indeed. No, very good. Okay. I think I just want to kind of maybe direct one more question over to Stephen, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. I do think, what we're expecting now, and I think what you told us offered probably some welcome clarity on what I personally thought was a Scottish Government message that was quite convoluted in terms of the energy industry. It kind of felt like, well, we don't want to kind of raise punitive windfall taxes, but on the other hand, there's a presumption against, kind of like oil and gas exploration, and which we kind of think might be useful in terms of the investment required to deliver, kind of more green energy. But there's that point. And then when do you think you'll make it to Holyrood?
Thanks, Erica.
Sorry. Not sorry.
Look, folks, when it comes to clarity, and I think we can probably all agree on this, I don't think any particular political party has been very clear about what it wants to do with the energy sector, and I could pick different examples from different parties, including my own, quite easily and quite readily. The important thing for me has always been that in Scotland and the UK and in the West, more generally, we love to consume energy, but very rarely do we talk and reflect about where that energy comes from. And when you do talk and reflect about where that energy comes from, you immediately recognise that oil and gas exists, and oil and gas will exist long into the future. What needs to happen is you need to make sure that whilst that oil and gas is being used and being consumed, you, one, invest in the tech of tomorrow to ensure that you have the stability and the certainty of employment for the people who are in the industry just now to transfer in the years to come. But secondly, you need to make sure that you're capturing the emissions through the likes of carbon capture and storage. Because it is net zero, it is not zero. And that is a defining thing which I think a lot of policymakers, be it in Edinburgh or in Westminster, and indeed a lot of politicians in Edinburgh and in Westminster, don't think about in enough detail. Look, and I'm confident in my own position in this, I've been very certain throughout my time previously in the council and now, of course, in Westminster, about the importance of the oil and gas sector, not just to Aberdeen, but to the wider UK economy and the role that it's going to play in the energy transition. Very many of the people who work in oil and gas are going to be the people who deliver net zero, who deliver the renewables projects, and we need to make sure through the likes of the fantastic work that Paul and others are doing that this is recognised and we then deliver upon it. There is an energy strategy to come. There is a draft energy strategy, which of course had the words presumption against within it. I am not a member of the Scottish Government. I don't know when the energy strategy is going to be produced, but I can offer assurance to the room that my colleagues in Edinburgh have certainly heard my views and those of others loudly and clearly. And I look forward to seeing that strategy produced in due course. And I'm going to not answer your second question, Erica, because there's a general election this year, and that's very much where my focus lies.
Can I just pick up on something Stephen
Please
said
do,
there?
yes.
I think you made a really, really good point there. It's not zero, it's net zero. And I think standing back from it, there is still actually not a great understanding among the general public about what the transition is and what net zero actually means over time. Sure. That's not there yet. And we really have a job as an industry to communicate that and work on that. And just picking up on something Martin said, it's really great to hear what Wood are doing, because 200 entrants at scale, we need to do that as well. Everything's got to be done at scale. And one of the things we looked at, we tried to quantify some of these careers issues. We published a careers motivation survey back in, I think, January, and it looked at attitudes within industry and outside. Once you get people into the industry, they're interested. Outside, they're still concerned about the impact of oil and gas, nuclear. So getting people in and then using them as ambassadors for the industry out in schools, out in colleges is really, really important, getting that message across. So there's a big job to do there as well. But it's not just schools and colleges, it's the general public in general.
Yeah, good. Anyone care to add to this before we open it up to questions? No? Okay, good. Right. Show of hands, who would like to ask a question? Oh, I'm going to go with Steve Allen first, please, and then, the gentleman next to him. Thank you.
Good morning.
Oh, wait, there's a mic coming to you, Steve. Great.
Good morning. Please don't roll your eyes, but I'm Steve Allen. I'm here as part of a community group, the Not Sticking My Face to the Road wing of it, who are trying to work with government and the industry to cause some reflection and be engaged in the process of developing strategic infrastructure in the northeast of Scotland. A couple of questions. The first is, I'd be interested in reflections on the role of communities as partners in this process, because we've heard a lot already about partnership, but the communities affected by these developments haven't, I think, been mentioned yet. And the second, more specific in relation to training and development, is that it appears to be apparent from the other side of the process that the skills are possibly not as developed as they might be in the industry to engage with the communities in a way that's effective. What we find ourselves in is a position where we're forced into a place where our only tactical option is to object and to be difficult. What many of us want to do is we want to be part of the process. We want to be empowered and engaged by the industry so that we can become co-producers with you, co-design some of these solutions in a way that works for all of us. So the second question then, first question is, what role do you see for communities in this process of transition? And the second question is, how do we address politically and from within the industry, how do we address an apparent skills gap in terms of the industry engaging with communities, and perhaps more interestingly, the skills and knowledge in communities to engage effectively with the industry?
Thanks very much. Yes, so I think when Andrew, you said people don't understand what net zero is, I think also there's a very little grasp of what net zero means, particularly in terms of its impact on landscapes. We know that there's no, kind of transmission, no transition without transmission. But I mean, when we're talking to communities who are also going to be far more involved, where does that come from? And how do we engage better? I don't know. Yeah. It's a skills issue as well.
It is a skills issue, and I think community engagement for me comes in when I look at the panoply of industry that we work with industry, we work with educational providers, and we also work with the learners themselves, who of course come from the community. So I think where it's important is that there's consistent messaging out into the community and contact with the community down through those three strands. So what tends to happen or is happening increasingly in the employer part of our offering is employers are starting to work hard with communities because they recognise the skills issue. They actually need to engage the community and bring people in. So I was down at Hinkley Point in Somerset last week with EDF, for example, huge community outreach programme. EDF is the biggest bus transport provider in Somerset, for example. They've built a legacy accommodation that's going to be handed over to the community at the end of the process. So they've invested in Bridgewater and Taunton College, which is going to be a legacy at the end of the process to educate that community there. So I think encouraging the companies that we work with and the employers that we work with to give back to the communities is something that we do. Also through the further education network, because we work with large further education providers, for example, Nesco and down at Forth Valley. They're part of the community. So encouraging them to get the message out, how important the transition is, and again, what I said about encouraging new entrants in. So I think it's beginning to happen, but it requires constant vigilance on our part to make it happen, and I accept that.
Okay. Paul?
Yeah, maybe I'm going to take your question slightly wider, right? Because I get the question a lot, what does a fantastic energy transition look like? And this made me think about I don't know if you remember these old Carlsberg adverts. Yeah? So if Carlsberg does the energy transition, it'd probably be the best energy transition in the world, right? So just think about what an ideal energy transition looks like. Imagine you can buy a wind farm on Amazon. You get it delivered by Uber Zero. Yeah? It integrates like Apple products. Yeah? Think about that. And actually it just works, and you can actually book your grid connection online. Think about how brilliant it is. And actually you can do a TripAdvisor rating for communities. Yeah? Back to your point. That would be. The question is how far away are we from that? And the answer is quite a lot. And I think that's where we need to start thinking about is around this. We have bucket loads of ambition in this country around what we want to do. There's not a shortage of ambition. There's not a shortage of willingness of people and capabilities to do so. We have already most of the ingredients in place. 90% of our workforce is transferable to the renewable sector, medium-high transferability. We know that. So the workforce is there. With all the ingredients, this is about putting it in the mix in there, and the communities are critical. But of course, we can't put it in the places. Of course, it doesn't work. But think about it, the Carlsberg test for me. Think about what do we need to do? How far away are we? And actually, we know what good looks like because we've done it for the last 40 years.
I think we just need to add on that. You said we know what good looks like. I would say that we can improve on that because good, I would say, would be a gender, equity.
Love it. Brilliant. Add that to it, Nick. You're absolutely right. Yeah. We could be better. Yeah. Carlsberg plus. Yeah.
And I think it's just, when we have all this training, we have, untapped resource. I think an untapped resource is not just, people coming into the industry. It's also you have women out there who are talented who aren't coming back into the industry. So, or you have women who have studied engineering but don't come into engineering. We need to look at the blockers of why that is and make the energy industry more attractive and can make that transition, make a difference. Because I think currently, if we look at the renewables, the gender balance is 35%, which is, much closer to that 40 that, we'd want to be aiming for. Far further away from the 16, and we don't want it to go down as we try and take in the processes that we currently have and go into the energy industry. So it's just keeping an eye on diversity, and I think if you have it at the forefront of your mind, just like in the energy industry, we have a focus on safety. If you have the focus on diversity, then we're going to make those innovative, creative teams that we need in order to successfully do the transition.
Good. And then Stephen, communities.
Yeah, and this is a hugely pertinent point, particularly for those of us who live in Aberdeen. We not only have the proposals for the massive infrastructure just outside my boundary, as I would see it, for Aberdeen South, but we also have the energy transition zone, which is to hopefully be developed in all likelihood down in Tory. And certainly from the correspondence that I receive, the scale of community concern is massive, because they feel like something is happening to them rather than being a part of the delivery of something for the future. And this goes back to my previous point in relation to energy and how we talk about it and how we think about it. We need to make sure that we are not just talking about where the energy comes from, but how it gets to places as well. And when we go on that journey and when we do these things, we need to make sure that those people who live in those areas come with us. Otherwise, we create a whole manner of problems. Now, there's very many ways for that to happen. There's through the political engagement, but it's also through the engagement between industry and the communities who are going to be receiving this infrastructure as well. Their expectations on both sides and trying to work collaboratively. Now, that's not going to be easy. Not everyone is going to be happy at the outcomes. We all remember the debates very many years ago about onshore wind and the damage that was going to do to the fabric of Scotland's society. Nobody talks about that now. And in fact, in the Parliament where I sit in Westminster, they're very angry about the fact that they decided to put a moratorium on onshore wind in contrast to what happened in Scotland, and are now looking at ways to accelerate that on their journey to net zero. So it requires engagement, it requires people working together, but it also requires an acceptance from all that we're never going to find the perfect solution, but hopefully we can find a better solution than what's on the table as it stands.
Thank you very much. Next gentleman. There's a mic coming, and if you fancy introducing yourself as well, that would be great.
Thank you very much, and thank you, panel. My name is Glenn Reynolds. I'm here with a couple of hats, one of which is as a councillor for Aberdeenshire Council, with a communities hat on that and a communities spokesperson, but I'm also hoping to represent a significant body of people in a constituency which has a number of employees from the energy sector. So I'm here very much to listen and learn. I was interested in what Paul was saying about the collaborative approach, government, regulatory and industry. In a sector, if I can ask the panel, in a sector which seems to increasingly be dominated by mergers and consolidation, I wonder how you see that fits into the transition going forward. And in that context, there is much chatter about a national champion in relation to the work that we're here talking about today. And I wonder how the panel sees that evolving and what that would look like. Thank you.
So just to clarify, are you saying that the Bank of England for the energy sector, what would that look like?
Well, just the concept of a champion, a national champion, why, how, and when would that be appropriate? What would that look like? It may be that I'm thinking beyond the Bank of England, to be perfectly honest.
There we go. Aim high. Right. I feel this is another one for you, Stephen, to start off with.
Yeah, that's a very easy question, Glenn. Thank you for that. Look, can I actually take that back and argue that I don't think it should be the responsibility of one person or one institution to have responsibility for the energy transition, I think it's a responsibility that falls upon all of our shoulders. Everyone who is in public life, who operates in the policy sphere and who works in industry, to do, as I said earlier, to work collaboratively to try and get the best outcomes possible. Now, if we were to look at a very small example of that in relation to offshore wind, and we looked at the auction round which took place last year, we have an abundance of projects right across these isles, not just in Scotland, but right across these isles that are ready to go if the financial mechanism to support them was in place. There was an auction round last year and not a single offshore wind project bid in for the Contracts for Difference. Now, Contracts for Difference has been a phenomenal success, but it was a phenomenal failure last year. And if you speak with industry now, the pot of money which has been put in place, which I think is around 800 million for the coming year, it just isn't enough. In fact, most of the main players that I've spoken to would like it to see to be well in excess of 1.3, 1.4 billion in order to get the level of investment required to drive the supply chain opportunities domestically. And when we look at that as a snapshot, what we have there is a failing from government, and we have a government or governments which are not engaging properly with industry to make sure that the objectives can be met. And that's where responsibility falls upon all of us to deliver. And that's challenging, that's difficult, but we need to get into that space and we need to do it quickly in order to make sure that we get the transition right and we don't lose out on the skills and the opportunities of supply chain to elsewhere, to our competitors who are driving forward with masses of investment, be that in Japan, be that in India, or be that in the United States of America.
Good. Paul, do we need something stronger than that maybe to resist electoral cycles and think beyond?
Yeah, I just want to build on Steve's point, particularly the last couple of lines there. The competition is increasing. If you see what the Inflation Reduction Act in the US is doing, the Green Deal equivalent in Europe, all the things happening, actually money is pulled to other parts of the world because it's more attractive to invest. If we want the UK to be successful and Scotland to be successful, we're going to have the competitive framework here. So we need to make sure we have everything in place to set us up for success. We're not there yet. We need indeed more money for the licensing rounds, and we need more money to actually support the industry, be it hydrogen, carbon capture storage, the grid and energy integration. That's going to be critical. Now, the question I would put back in the room, and again, sorry, Stephen, maybe slightly different than you, is the current system is not going to get us there. So actually, where we see elements around, we need stronger coordination, we need better managed plans, we need far more kind of pulling this together, collaboration across the political spectrum. We need to probably think about, is there a mechanism out there which actually allows us to do this? Where we do it has been very successful across the country, but it has to be a collaboration between industry, government, and regulators to do so. But if we don't do it, competition will eat us away, right? And so I am an advocate of saying is, actually, we have the best wind in this part of the world on our doorstep. We have the best opportunity to do this. This is ours to win, but also ours to lose. And this is a very narrow window. So we have an obligation to go after it, make that very clear, both the political elements with industry, trade bodies, and also regulators to make it happen, and happen fast.
Martin's actually got an interesting perspective as a global industry. Where does wood deploy its resources, and is the UK as compelling for investment as other areas in the world?
It's a very good question. I think,
no pressure.
well, I think the answer is yes. But we are seeing some of our top skills start to look overseas for those opportunities. Certainly some of those more mature skills where they want to stay in the oil and gas industry, the Middle East is a big pull, Southeast Asia similarly. But we are growing in the UK. We're in a really strong position in the UK, and if you look at Wood, I think we're 6,500 people across the UK now, across the offices in Reading, Glasgow, Stockton, and Aberdeen. Obviously, the sites and facilities we also work on as well. If I can come back to the communities part, I'm fairly new to Aberdeen, so I'm settling into the community here in Aberdeen. I've been here 6 months, but one thing I've loved about coming to Aberdeen is it's a community, and it's an industrial community as well as a personal community. And what I've seen here, different to my previous roles where they've been more global, is there is a real spirit that we're in this together. And it really does shine through this community and the industrial sector. When I talk to our clients, it's how can we be better? How can we maximise the potential that's in the North Sea? How can we maximise the potential of those skills that reside in Aberdeen to enable a just transition that enables us into the future? So I'm really excited about the UK market. We're seeing growth, we're attracting people I think 200 graduates over the next year is a real statement of intent as to what we see. And I see, for once, because we talk about collaboration across our industry, we need to collaborate to transition, we need to collaborate to build in the supply chain. Actually, Aberdeen is doing that, and it's ahead of many parts of the world in doing that. So I think it's a real positive outlook. Talking in terms of some of the changes in ownership on the assets and the operators, that's business, you know, and that will bring different opportunities as well, because that's new money coming into the industry. They'll look at how they operate differently, they'll look for efficiencies, they'll look for new technology on how they extend an asset life cycle, they'll look at how they can decarbonise, maybe be more responsible than some of the current. So I wouldn't see that as a negative, I'd see that as a positive opportunity as well.
Great. Lovely. Next question. We have one in front and then another one after.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. Pete Tippler, I'm the former managing director of X Academy, which we unfortunately had to close down at the end of April. But some interesting things come out of the panel so far, so really great to hear things like grasping the opportunity, really important, the number of people being hired by Wood and taking on this year. I guess I want to come to, Paul's point on follow the money. I'm just going to give a very mini case study, but I was talking to an offshore wind developer, and they have spent 6 months trying to hire someone into their environmental consents team. And they ended up taking people from the consultants that they were working with. The consultants, in turn, ended up taking people from the regulator and a couple of the stakeholders. And yet, that same organisation is sitting in the Scottish Offshore Wind Energy Council working group saying, actually, one of the biggest barriers to deployment of offshore wind, and one of the biggest hurdles for attracting investment into this country, is the fact that the consenting timeline takes too long and there isn't enough consenting resource in the regulator and the stakeholders. So, and yet, lots of companies are saying we need people with 3 to 5 years experience. There are hundreds of people that are applying to X Academy every couple of months saying that they really, really wanted to work in the energy sector, but they couldn't get into the jobs because all the companies they wanted to approach were looking for people with 3 to 5 years experience. So that 100 billion that is potentially up for grabs to be spent in the energy sector is more and more undermined the longer we go on not investing in early stage careers. What are the opinions on how do we actually grasp that opportunity and make sure that all the people that are really excited and interested to join the sector actually can get into the jobs that we all know are going to be needed in the future?
Well, I, for one, didn't know that X Academy had shut down. Yeah. So that's quite, kind of a problem and highlights probably one of the massive hurdles, actually. We can all talk about net zero till the cows come home, but there's so many, there's a big gap between here and there, and we don't know how to fill it. There's a skills gap. And as you say, like there's this interesting, kind of merry-go-round of people kind of being sucked away from very important roles because they're the only people that know what's going on. So this is just like the beginning of some of our problems. So over to you guys. Who wants to take that one?
If I was to answer, I would probably just reiterate everything that I've ever read in Paul Deleuze's work. So it's probably best that Paul says it for himself, rather than me pretending I know everything.
I'll pick this one up. And again, I'm sorry that there's a new report coming out, and you will read some of it. But I'll give you some of the insights, right? Think about the workforce distribution. We got about just under 150,000 people working in the offshore energy industry, 120,000 plus or minus a bit oil and gas, and about just over 30,000 in the offshore wind sector. The question here is, if oil and gas ramps down, wind ramps up, you want to make sure you get this right. We call it the Goldilocks zone. You kind of want to make sure you just get it just right. Because if you do it just right, you actually can take the skills and capabilities, the supply chain elements, and just apply them to the renewable sector and accelerate it. If you're too slow on wind, which is unfortunately where we're heading, you have a bit of an issue. And that's what we currently find is we have one industry ramping down, the other industry not ramping up as fast. And this is where that becomes a real element in here. And this is where I think our challenge collectively comes in, is we need to start ways of accelerating. Waiting 7, 8, or 9 years to get into the grid is a real problem. Paying wind farms for monies to basically on standby because we can't get them into the grid. We could have used that money slightly differently, if you think about more creatively doing this stuff. So there's a different way of doing it, but this requires a different mindset. It requires the community engagement in a completely different way, because we need to get the grid being built, the connections being built, all that to happen. We need to start saying is actually from a regulator perspective, this needs to happen in single-digit years, not in kind of longer periods. This is a kind of refab, replumbing, rewiring of our energy system, and that is of course big. Now, why is it important? Because it's an election year, and what we hear about it from the political parties, this is now a differentiator between the political parties around what they want to do, how they're going to do it, how they're going to execute it. So this is where I think this is hugely important. And again, if you think about the equation, investment drives activity, drives people. We have a conversation about people. It is hugely important. But actually, it starts at the investment activity level. If you don't get that right, it determines how many people you need. And that is the big conversation now, is around how do you make that equation work? And again, watch this space. More to come.
All of that, by the way. Plus, you know, an engineer who works in the oil and gas sector is an engineer who could work in the renewables sector. My brother-in-law is an industrial abseiler. An industrial abseiler who works in Norway doing decommissioning at the moment, but an industrial abseiler who would quite happily work in the renewables sector if there was a job that was available of sort of similar pay. And we know that those skills are transferable. Paul has shown through his work over very many years now that those skills are transferable, but they are only transferable if there is jobs for people to take on. Those jobs aren't there yet, and that's where the responsibility lies upon all of us who work in the political sphere to make sure that we provide, again, that keyword certainty on investment, on policy direction, so that industry knows where it can go and how it gets there. And we've not been able to do that up till now. The policy landscape in Westminster has changed dramatically in the time that I've been there. We've gone from Boris Johnson saying that, of course, the UK was going to be a net zero renewables superpower, to a position where the UK government's view in relation to net zero is drastically different. We've seen the likely incoming government say that it's going to invest £28 billion in the green energy transition. That's been watered down to just £5 billion over the course of a 5-year period. The uncertainty that that provides at the same time as IRA is going through in the States, the green projects are going through in Europe, Japan and India are seeking to ramp up their investments, and of course Saudi Arabia with the opportunities that they have and the sheer wealth that they have to line the desert with solar panels and desalinate their water in order to create green hydrogen is a challenge that we need to respond to. So the short answer is, in my view, that the jobs can be there, the skills are there. We don't have enough people, but we as politicians need to provide the framework within which all that can work, and we're not there yet. And that's a responsibility and a failure of us. But if we don't get this right over the next few years, we will have a renewable sector. It will just all be imported, and we'll lose the supply chain opportunities and the jobs which have seen this city thrive. And none of us in this room should allow that to happen.
Well said.
Very good. Okay. Pete, are you still interested in asking a question? Okay, we've got a mic down here in front, please. Thank you.
Well, I will speak. It doesn't really matter. Yeah. So thanks, guys. This has been really encouraging. My name is Pete Preston, and to hear such positivity from Professor Andrew and Paul, and also Mr. Select. One of the things I kind of represent is that I work for a company called Cultural Harmony in one hat, and another one called Settlers. So I'm going to try to take this back into the community. So what I'm going to be learning here today. So I'm going to ask, especially Paul and also Andrew, because this is a workforce thing. Is there a way of, if you look at, say, maybe also inspired by Mr. Ken here, say, before the 70s, Aberdeen was not an oil-centric place. It was fishing and industry trade. The oil came and uplifted so many from the community into a new industry and prosperity. I sense the same is happening here with this transition. So that most people say, like women in Sweden, if you look at the wind industry, there's lots of women working, doing all the engineering stuff in Sweden. Is it a sort of spearhead whereby they're actually looking intentionally at these minority, could be women, could be ethnic, to be actually engaged into this kind of communities? If you look at RGU, prosperity in the schools, the oil industry. But from the representation I get, I don't think that they're shifting into this new prosperity. So is there a drive or a spearhead that will be looking to intentionally engage or create an arm that would have this as one of their mandates instead?
From our point of view, from the ECITB's point of view, the answer is a very clear yes. We're already having some success working at that. We have a specific group called IDEA, which is, you can look it up on our website, which is intended to improve the EDI position across all the industries that we work with. We have a young engineers group called Innovate. We've also kicked off something called the EDI network with a group with our employers, in fact, across the piece. So we have many employers have joined up. It's there to help them. It's there to help them open up pathways that wouldn't otherwise have been there. So we already have formal structures in place to move that along. It's something I'm very keen on supporting and pushing through, because if we're going to fill this gap of 40,000 people that we see, we're going to have to open it up. All the pathways have to open up. I see good specific examples also elsewhere around the industry. For example, Shell, Girls in Energy, that's helpful from a gender balance point of view. That's just recently been kicked off. So we've kicked off as well a program for STEM returners that we're working with the Global Underwater Hub. So that we actually have, as a training board, a number of specific initiatives that we've put in place to help. And we'll have a chat afterwards, and I'll point you in the right direction.
Great. Martin?
Yeah, so I think a great question. I think, fortunately, yesterday I sat on two panels down at our Stockton office. One was the Early Careers Network, and the other was the Women in Wood Network. And we talked openly about what are the challenges about bringing talent into the organisation. And both sides talked about their challenges of joining Wood. And it was, sometimes you don't see what you see. And there was some real fundamental small issues that can be easily addressed. And some of them were, Wood's drive for excellence. We will look for, simple thing, we would look for a master's degree because you want the top talent. But the bachelor's degree just means you're just as bright, just as talented, but maybe don't have the financial background to do that additional year for the master's. So let's look at our intake program and let's not be divisive rather than inclusive. We talk about inclusion, but then we straight away, in terms of the intake, put something in there. So, we will look at that and change that. I think in terms of our engagement with schools, I almost feel that once our future talent has left school, it's almost too late in some ways. We need to be talking to them at the 12, 13, 14 years stage, where they can have a choice on what subjects they follow. They do have a choice whether to go to college, whether to go to university, but also the degree apprenticeships. I'm a real fan. I came through as an apprentice. I left school at 16. So I know that everybody out there has an opportunity to get to where they need to be, regardless of their background education. But the new degree apprenticeships, I think, is a real vehicle to enable talent to join the industry that are coming from different fiscal backgrounds and enable us to establish a broader resource pool to draw upon. I think we talked yesterday around the return to work. So how do we attract talent? I think it was mentioned just before on there's an awful lot of parents out there, both male and female, that have left the industry because they've focused on their family. But the family's now getting to an age where they've got a little bit more time and freedom to come back in. How do we, as a responsible employer, enable that to happen? So we talked about having open doors, getting people back interested in the industry, engaging with schools, but also engaging with bringing school-aged children into our community, into the office, showing them what we do, sharing what the opportunities are within the industry. But most of those children need a driver, and the drivers are the parents, and it gives us access to those parents to actually encourage them that a company like Wood, where people assume we only hire engineers, we only hire commercial, but every career you want to follow in life, you can achieve with a company like Wood or our competition. If you want to be in legal, if you want to be in accounting, finance, HR, it's all there in abundance. Recruitment, it's not just those technical functions. And we also talked yesterday around how do we encourage functional expertise to move across into the business. So how do we support that transition in a safe place? So we talked about fail-safe yesterday, where how do we enable those with the lesser experience, talking to that 2 to 5 years, to take on a higher challenge, but in a safe environment that gives them the mentoring and the nurtureship to be able to succeed. So I think there's great opportunity there, and I think it's on us to be a responsible employer and engage with the community on that side.
Now we'll have Stephen, and then I'll...
Yeah, just very briefly. We've spoken a lot about transferability and the fact that the skills can transfer quite readily, the vast majority of them, from the oil and gas sector into the renewable sector, the net zero space. What we don't talk about enough is that we still need more people. And there's only 2 ways that happens. So one is a traditional way, which is probably going to take too long, and all the indicators are that that's not the way society is headed. The second way is to make sure that we have people coming to live and work in the UK. And I'm afraid to break it to everyone in the room, but this is where certainty does exist in Westminster, and it's not in a positive direction, because there is certainty that we don't want to have more people coming into the UK to work, to live, to study in our educational institutions. And we, as a collective, and I know that the universities in Aberdeen have been very strong on this in recent times because of the immediate impact it's going to have on their ability to fund the work that they do, we need to be all conscious of the consequences of a system where we're not inviting people to come in and offer their expertise, but also to learn, study and work with their families in the UK, and the knock-on impact that's going to have upon not just the energy sector to thrive, but right across our public sector and indeed all the other aspects of the private economy. Perhaps not the brightest note, but it is the realistic position that we are in, and we all need to have that conversation and reflect upon the outcomes that can have.
Well, as a perimenopausal female immigrant to the UK, I can only like to see more effort being put into attracting wider amounts of talent to the UK. Emma, what can you add to this?
I guess, we've already talked a lot about the younger generation, trying to get them into careers, and that's certainly an area where we need to focus. But I think it's also, we don't want to neglect the already working community. So like you say, there's a lot of women who leave the workforce when they reach menopause. And that's because the working environment, for whatever reason, isn't suitable for them. And it's kind of understanding those issues that only women will face. And it's kind of making sure that the workplace is suitable for that. I think women, when we reach the menopausal state, generally you're in a financial situation where you don't have to work, but there could be a want, and it's making sure that you keep that.
I'm like, where's the money?
Not all, but there are a number of them where that is they're most financially secure, so it's kind of, you have that resource, but it's making sure that they don't leave. And I think, when we, like I say, just put a focus on DEI and making sure that everyone feels comfortable, because, there's been tons of research saying that when you have a team that's more diverse and that can bring their whole selves to work, and they don't feel like they need to hide, their family or whatever caring commitments they have, then you're going to get better outcomes and better innovation, and you're going to have people that are going to want to work and not feel that it's too stressful and they need to go home. And I think everything that we learned from COVID in terms of, the hybrid working, when that came a little bit more readily available, and then we see our industry changing in terms of creating greater flexibility, keep improving on that so that we know what our community needs in order to be present and to work. And I guess just being a bit more open and thinking that a lot of people, you said before, Martin, that you have parents who maybe leave the workforce because of that caring commitment. Well, we could instead of having to leave, there's part-time work, there's flexible work, and there are other options. But sometimes people feel that those options, they have a negative connotation associated to them. I know myself, after I had my first child, when I went back to work and I was working 4 days a week, the expectation from me was still to deliver what I would deliver in 5 days a week, yet I was called a part-timer. And it's that negative connotation, and words are powerful. And you can say something flippantly and think that it's in jest, but it can still bring meaning, and it can make somebody feel uncomfortable. And we need to know the power of our words and make sure that everyone feels included and will want to work for an organisation. I'd say, Wood, I know that as Access Network, we've partnered with you a lot, and I think that from an outsider's perspective, I know that you do quite a bit in order to attract and to try and show your interest in D&I, and I think it's about organisations doing that and making them know that it's the individual that you care about.
It's a learning journey, isn't it? I mean, for you, many of us have grown up through a number of different decades, unfortunately. Things that we see as normal, and I said this to the team yesterday, some of the things we see as normal and say as normal are not normal anymore. And we need that transparency and visibility to be able to be a continual learning organisation that has the courage to change. And maybe something wasn't 100% wrong, and maybe it was only 3% wrong, but that doesn't mean to say we don't change, because the 3% can actually prevent us from retaining some of the talent that we have. So we are trying to be open in the feedback that we get, and we are trying to ensure that we maintain flexibility and agility. I'm a big advocate for return to the office. I'll be open and honest, because if I'm not, somebody will put it on social media. But I'm not asking for 5 days, 10 hours a day, 8 hours a day. I'm asking for a common theme where we have a responsibility to our early careers, but also the mid-careers, to pass on knowledge, to pass on experience, to train, teach, nurture. Very difficult to do by teams. Much easier to do when you sat next to each other, much easier to do when you're in an integrated team that's multidisciplinary, multifunctional. But it also enables us to see people that are struggling, enables you to see where there's maybe more mental health challenges because it's physically visible rather than just the head and shoulders. But it also enables us to see talent that you can't see on a team screen, that through discussion, through engagement, has actually got a really bright future, but you can't see that if you're not in the office sometimes. People can work really hard, and I am absolutely sure all of our staff that work from home, smash it out of the park and do a great job. But I just think from a mental welfare, I think from that continual learning journey, as a community, we need to be in front of each other and to engage with each other. And I think we need to be responsible that we don't lose the flexibility that the pandemic gave us, because that was a shift in all our lives that I don't want to go back to the previous. I think it's a huge benefit for everyone.
Brilliant, yeah, I agree. And we have a question over there.
I don't know if my voice is carrying.
Oh, I'd say bring it. We'll give you a minute, and yeah, very good.
Thank you. Very interesting conversations. I'm Alan Freeland. I'm VP of Finance International for DNOW. The local company is McLean International up in Petersea Park, just at the side of Altons. I'm old school. Workplace is workplace. Home is home. So I just back up some of the comments Marta's been making. Hearing about the challenges of people coming into the industry, and we're talking about migration, whether it's into the UK or from within the UK to Aberdeen, Scotland. Which part does taxation play in the difficulties and challenges of this, be it corporation tax, windfall tax, and personal tax? Because as we know, Scotland has a higher tax rate than England.
Sounds like one for me.
Indeed, well, I presume that
Well
this extra
volunteered.
tax banding, can act as a disincentive, and we've seen evidence of it.
I know you were looking at the rest of the panel to answer there, but I'll save them, don't worry. So there was analysis produced by Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, which was released just, I think, within the last couple of weeks, which may be missed amongst the furore that had happened in relation to other matters. And what that evidenced was the fact that more people are moving to Scotland within the UK than are leaving Scotland within the UK. In fact, more people are moving from England to Scotland than vice versa, which I think is, obviously, I don't think it's a surprise based upon the many things that we get in Scotland, which are in stark contrast to what's available elsewhere in these isles. I don't want to get too political and list off all of those and all the rest of it, but that's the analysis that HMRC produced, and I'm more than happy to share that with yourself or indeed anyone else.
Sorry, if you drill down into that data though, there was evidence that higher earners, there was a decrease in...
So I was waiting to come to that.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to feet to the fire, darling.
I'm a unique politician who covers all the bases. So we know that in general, that's the case. We know there was anecdotal evidence within the report, and I think it's actually referred to as that amongst some higher earners, there may well be the case that people are moving in the opposite direction. But in terms of the wider tax base, people are moving from elsewhere in the UK to Scotland. Now, of course, there was decisions taken in the Scottish budget this year, which won't have been visible within that data, and we need to make sure that we are assessing that in real time in relation to what that means, because what we don't want to see is capital flight in terms of individuals because of the skills that they have from primarily central belt areas, because of the geographical location, to cities in the north of England. Everything indicates that that's anecdotal as it stands, but we need to be careful that we don't get into a position where that anecdotal evidence becomes actual evidence. In terms of the wider discussion with regards to the windfall tax, which you mentioned there, I've been criticised by some quarters, indeed by, I believe, our former partners in government, amongst others, with regards to my views in relation to a windfall tax. I support the windfall tax that's in place. I think all political parties are signed up to that at the moment. What I have grave concerns about is the increase. So firstly, the extension, which was put in place by the UK government, but also the proposed increase, not just in relation to the windfall tax, but the removal of incentive allowances for industry as well, which is often not talked about as part of that package. And because of the tipping point that we get to for industry in terms of its ability to invest in new projects. And if industry in the northeast of Scotland, the oil and gas sector, is not investing in new projects, then that means that those jobs are not required, which means people move elsewhere to fulfill those jobs, which means we have a drain upon our talent, the very talent who are able to deliver net zero. And that's where my concern lies. Again, I've been very consistent in that regard, but this is where we need that wider conversation in the political sphere about the consequences of taxation, particularly in relation to taxation upon industry itself, and the unintended consequences in your ability to be able to meet your energy transition goals.
Good. Paul?
Yeah, just adding to the windfall tax comment, if that's all right. So a windfall tax, if you have windfall profits, a windfall tax is not unreasonable, I think, and nobody argues about it. But when you have a windfall tax for 7 years, what this currently is, it's not a windfall tax, it's a tax, right? So that's the kind of first big message. The other thing is, of course, you have a windfall tax when the prices are high because of particular elements, in this case, Russia invading Ukraine, and of course, a particular thing what drove that event. You look at the oil prices and the gas prices now, it's actually back to the level it was before Russia invaded Ukraine. So the kind of question really is around is, what are we taxing here? But the consequences are quite severe, right? So what we now see happening is people saying is this the tax regime I want to invest in? And we see actually capital flight and investment flight. And that is a problem because actually if you want this industry to be there for the long term, you want to make sure you see continuous investment, confidence of investments coming in. And when investor confidence goes and say, I want to go somewhere else, then you need to think about is if we got the right progressive tax regime to make this work. So I can understand the logic. I can understand in a year where there is an election that this is not something you want to touch. I can see that, right, for very practical reasons. But the reality also needs to hit is around this, what is it, what a progressive tax regime looks like, what we want to get it right. Yeah, and that is why I think the big conversation comes in is hopefully after the election, we're going to have the people need to deliver it for the next 5 years. We'll think about what is the compensation here. Because I deeply worry about it, that is, we have to remain competitive. The competition is really, really tough. And if we don't actually get it, we don't get the investment coming here, we don't get the continued employment, we don't get the supply chain, we don't actually can accelerate the energy transition because we don't have the basics in place. So I do think it needs to fit in whoever is in power next, need to fit in the either the energy strategy for the Scottish government or in the new political landscape what plays out in Westminster after the elections.
Good.
So,
Now, Martin, I'll come back to you, but Martin, you've recently come up to Scotland, and you're probably not short of a few bob. How did you feel? How did you feel about differential taxes? I'm putting you on the pressure here. So.
Well, 2 children in English university that I do pay fees for. The few bob has been divested in that direction. I think what attracted me to move to Scotland, in honesty, it was quite a difficult decision. The family's been based in Surrey. We have lived overseas on a number of occasions. What drew me to Scotland was the culture of wood. They brought me up here. I'd said no a couple of times. They brought me up. I met with the team, the wider team, the leadership team, and there was something very exciting about the culture within that organisation. Having immersed myself into Aberdeen, it's such an amazing country to be a part of. I've never felt quite at home as anywhere as I've felt here. I think the way the community and certainly the workplace have embraced me and the family in terms of making sure we were comfortable, we were involved in activities, we were engaged, and also that we were safe was quite amazing. Our children have been up, they love it. They're golfers, so of course they're going to love it, especially if I'm paying the fees. But I think, and I talked about the community before, the industrial community, the social community, is something really quite special. I know that the guys in the office get a bit bored of me talking about, the secret of Aberdeen, because it really is quite special, and I think one of my frustrations is getting in a taxi and for the next 10 minutes I know that Aberdeen's going to be run down and everything that's good about Aberdeen is seen as negative. There's a huge amount of good in Aberdeen. It's got some of the most beautiful architecture in the world. It's on the doorsteps of some of probably the wildest and most beautiful wildlife, not wildlife, but certainly countryside that we have, scenery-wise, some amazing castles. Just, if you put it into a mixing pot, it's got everything. And, we talk about the tax, is the tax punitive? To be honest, I didn't even know it was in a higher tax rate until I got here, so that was a welcome committee surprise.
Welcome to Scotland,
But, you pay, wherever you are in the world, other than, maybe the Middle East, but you pay taxes in a different way there. You're going to pay tax. It's just a part of the way we live, the way we work. If you're earning the money, you're paying the tax. So for me, it's about the quality of life, the style of life, but also around the workplace as well, and dealing with clients that actually want to help and support versus wanting to be controversial and contractual.
Amazing. Well, I'm glad you're feeling welcome.
I'm glad we're joining the Aberdeen Tourist Board.
I thought you were going to say it was the weather that got you.
It's the weather, absolutely. Andrew, sorry, you were going to say.
Just to come back to your question, I just wanted to say that I work for an arm's length government body with Westminster, with the Scottish Government and with the Welsh Government. So we don't generally comment on policy, but what I do is get messages back from the employers that we work with, and the plea is always twofold: stability and clarity, I think, and we need that for investment. We touched on that point earlier. Investors need stability and they need clarity, and so that's the plea coming back from the companies that I work with.
Okay. And a question there at the back, thank you, and then we'll have another question over there, thank you.
I'll just move. I'm just conscious of the infamous Chester Hotel pillar. I'm Derek Christie. I work for Siemens Energy, Siemens Gamesa. We're actually delivering the energy transmission. We're actually making it happen every day. We opened a wind turbine factory to making blades 7 years ago in Hull, and we saw the difference it made to the community. Every job we had 100 people applying for. We just asked for another 200 members of staff, and we had close to 10,000 people applying for it. So there's a desire for people to get involved. And through models like SIM, which the Scottish Government have been very much behind, we've seen talk of a new turbine factory up in Edinburgh, a new possible one from Mingyang in Inverness. We've Sumitomo coming to Ardisia, and we hear stories about potential for a turbine tower manufacturing in Nig. What my question would be, why not Aberdeen? Why is Aberdeen going to miss out on this? And is it because Aberdeen haven't grasped the opportunity? haven't grasped that opportunity to transition sooner? Or, as you'd mentioned, Stephen, is there an opportunity that maybe this region is going to miss out? So, and I'd be delighted to come to your office in Westminster and tell you more about it.
Yeah. This is a very good question, because one of the things that Paul has always focused on is we need this manufacturing capability, but we just happy to outsource it. But if you could give us an answer, that would be great.
I mean, you don't have to come to my office in Westminster. You can come to the one around the corner if that's easier. But either will do. Look, I was up in Portneig just the other week watching some Siemens kit get brought in as part of the Murray East, Murray West, sorry. Murray East is already in place, of course, Murray West. That's coming online in the not too distant future, and the kit is phenomenal. I think when it comes to Aberdeen, one of the big constraints that we face in terms of the kit is the availability of laydown space and the ability to then link that in with our transport networks. What we know and what all of us are engaged with locally is trying to make sure that what we can attract to Aberdeen, we do attract. Sumitomo would be far too big, as I understand it, and having seen the groundwork that's getting put in place already would be far too big for Aberdeen itself. But that doesn't mean to say that we can't have a lot of the testing kit. We've already seen that with the Offshore Wind Centre, which is in ETZ, that we can't have many of the widgets and so on and so forth being created in Aberdeen. But most importantly, these things still need to be serviced by high-quality individuals, and the innovation that sits behind that can be done here as well. I know Energy Transition Zone are doing a fantastic amount of work to attract all those various opportunities to Aberdeen. And if there's a role for government, either Scottish Government or UK Government, to play in terms of helping to facilitate that, I'm willing to have those discussions with anyone to make sure that happens. Because that real and present situation we face with Aberdeen being a really nice place to live can continue if we get this right, and I'm pretty confident that we can.
Great.
Can I add a few things?
Yes.
So that's right. First of all, I mean, I would love to get Siemens bigger in Aberdeen, right?
Yeah,
so
of course, yeah.
let's talk
You're more
and
than
see what we
welcome.
can do,
Yeah.
and we'll pull you in the right way. That would be fantastic. But I think you make a broader point around we need capacity indeed to make things, do things. Because if you look at the nature of work and workforce at the moment, and again, just to kind of give you a few numbers around this stuff, we are very good at operating things, operating platforms, operating terminals, operating pipelines. And we actually, if you look at the workforce, the majority is actually in the OPEX kind of business. The future isn't like that. The future, as you're saying, is we need to build wind turbines, install wind turbines, build carbon capture storage facilities, we need to build hydrogen facilities, the grid. We need a slightly different workforce, and that has far more fabrication, manufacturing, installation, commissioning attached to it. So we need you on steroids to come and help do this stuff, and actually more like yourself. We would love to have it in this area because the ecosystem here is unique to the UK. It doesn't exist anywhere else. We have everything in place. The supply chain, the operators and developers, we've got the universities, we've got everything around us. This is the place you really want to be because it doesn't exist anywhere else. So actually we need Siemens and many more to come and work here in this place. So whatever we can do to help, let us know.
Great, fabulous. Now, there's two more people who would like to ask questions. There's one over there, and then there's James who wants to do the last one. Is that true? Great, okay. But first, please, thank you.
Morning, everyone. I've got two questions. So my name's Helen. I work at Tika. We wear a couple of hats. So we're the trade association representing the thermal insulation industry, and we're also the training provider, the only one in the mainland UK. So Stephen, for yourself first. So we take about 140 apprentices every year, or last year we did. 40 of them were from Scotland. Just to compare the funding models for apprenticeships for Scotland and England. So in England, we get between £16,000 and £21,000 per apprentice. In Scotland, we get between £2,000 and £4,000. And there's a cap. So last year, we were allowed 19 starts in Scotland, and we took 40, so we had to use the funds that we get otherwise to kind of substitute those Scottish apprentices. There's a real demand for Scottish apprentices, and today we spoke a lot about the kind of the white-collar investment in skills. But what about the blue collar? Because they're the people that keep our power stations going. And I'm just kind of interested in what's the plan for apprenticeships, because Scotland invests loads and loads of money in free university skills. But what about the kind of the blue collar and the lower level that keep those industries going? And Andrew, for you, connected competency, great idea. Probably works really well for disciplines that don't have those kind of route-ways to competence. But what about the industries that do have those route-way to competence and that have clearly defined paths to competency? Do they still need to sit a kind of arbitrary test, or is there a different plan for them? Okay.
So if we could start on, kind of why are we shortchanging apprentices in Scotland? Okay. And then moving on
to
the competencies.
Firstly, to your wider point in relation to blue-collar workers, I was up at Peterhead Power Station last year, and we can't downplay or underplay the significance of those workers to keeping everything going. And if it wasn't for the people working in the likes of that facility, then I would suggest that most homes in the UK would be in a much darker spot than what they have been over recent years. So nobody should downplay or discount the role that they all play. Look to your wider point in relation to apprenticeships. And the Scottish education system takes a bit of a kicking sometimes. 95% of our young people who leave school go on to what we regard as positive destinations. That means they go to college, they go directly into work, they go to university, where of course they don't pay any tuition fees in contrast to elsewhere on these isles, or they do indeed go into apprenticeships. With regards to the specifics in relation to the numbers, I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you and to put you in contact, if you've not already been, with Graham Day, who of course is one of the ministers in the Scottish Government with responsibility for that portfolio area. Because if there's more that can be done, I'd certainly be keen to play a role in making sure that can happen, because we can't discount the importance of apprenticeships. The funded landscape in Scotland's challenging. It's really challenging. I don't think anyone in this room needs me to go over the reasons why or what the consequences of that can be. But ultimately, politics is about decisions and priorities. And I'm more than happy to take back what you've said there, have a further chat with you and engage with my colleagues in Edinburgh.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, connected competence is something that so far has been confined to the oil and gas industry in the northeast of Scotland. It is very simple, as I mentioned in the keynote. What we've done so far is to make sure that you can be tested at a base level of competence with a set of clearly, not arbitrary, but clearly defined tests. You can then carry that forward over time and be retested in 3 to 4 years' time. What that delivers is resilience and transferability. So we've got it rolled out offshore. We've got 20 operators signed up to the Connected Competence Charter to say that they'll use it through their supply chain. So we've got a workforce that is increasingly, you're increasingly able to look at and say there is a base level of competence that has been reached that will be refreshed every 3 to 4 years. The intent, to answer your second point about what do we do next, the intent is to roll connected competence out into the other sectors that we look after, which include nuclear, renewables, pharma, chemicals, and the other 5 or 6 sectors we roll out. So it's not there yet, but it is our intent to move that model of base level of competence, which is clearly understood and tested every 3 to 4 years with a simple, clear set of tests, into other sectors.
Okay. Martin, briefly.
Yeah, just very quick, just picking up on the point around the trades and craft. We put a lot of effort into bringing through the apprenticeships on the blue collar side, if that's the right term. We have, and to Stephen's point just now, we get good investment from Scotland in terms of supporting those apprentices going on to working sites. Some of those working sites are becoming more challenging to place our apprentices on at the end of their 2-year college because they're either heading towards decommissioning, so the POBs are being much reduced. But we have found placements for them in England, but unfortunately the funding stops at the border. So currently the funding enables them to stay in local residence to the sites if they're working away from home. But if we find them a placement that's south of the border, then that funding stops. So that would be somewhere I'd like some help with, because it is Scottish skills that we can bring back into the community in the future.
Really interesting clarity. It's a very complicated area with, but we love devolution, obviously. Now, James, can you please forgive me? I've run out of time. Oh, thank you. Look, can I ask you to thank our panel for their time and their insights and for being open with us and sharing in the time-honored manner. Thank you ever so much, all of you. Thank you. Great. And you may repair